Welcome, everybody. We are so happy to have you all here for Museum Club today on this fine April day. Um, Not too many announcements from us here at the Museum of Idaho. We are excited to just today, we are rolling out registration for some brand new summer day camps. And so if you have kids or grandkids or nieces or nephews or anybody who fits into that uh, 6 to somewhere in the teenage years age group. We've got some really fun camps this year that we're going to be running throughout the summer. Things like Robots versus Monsters, Museum Time Machine, Mission to Space, and Gross Science. And going to be a lot of fun. We're excited. We're going to be able to do them COVID safe, although hopefully things even look better in the summer. So we'll see how that goes. Um, just for our museum club regulars here, I wanted to just let you know a little bit about our planning for future museum clubs. As you know, we normally like to do these sorts of things in person. We generally do them twice a month, but during the pandemic, we have gone down to once a month and virtual. And the plan is to remain as such for just a little bit longer. So we will keep you posted, but at the same time, if anybody has input or suggestions on what they would like to see, the direction you would like to see Museum Club go in the near future as we sort of navigate what coming out of the pandemic looks like, then please feel free to let any of us know here at the museum. If you don't have my email address, it's pr@museumofidaho.org. And you can call any one of us here at 208-522-1400. And we're always happy to talk about that because this museum club is for you, of course. And we want to make sure that we are meeting your needs and your interests. So um, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our presenter today. We are delighted to have Gary Eller with us. Gary has played American roots music since his childhood in rural West Virginia. And then, following a 30-year career as a nuclear scientist at Los Alamos National Lab in New Mexico, he retired to Nampa, Idaho in 2005 and became deeply involved in Idaho history and music at that point. And so, with support from the Idaho Humanities Council, he has compiled hundreds of historically rooted songs and poems and performs them throughout the state, or at least he did until the pandemic hit. Although it sounds like he's still able to do some performing here and there. Gary also works with museums and universities to collect, archive, and bring to life these wonderful windows into Idaho's heritage. Eller's work has inspired the creation of the Idaho Songs Project, of which he is the head and the founder, which to date has now published, as of just a couple months ago, 19, is that right? 19 CDs, accompanied by interpretive booklets providing background on songs and stories from Idaho history and regional history. And it is largely for this work that Gary Eller was honored just this last year with a Governor's Award in the Arts for 2000. And he is also a banjoist, a performer, songwriter, and a teacher. He has served on the board of the National Old Time Fiddlers and has been involved in volunteer work here in Idaho surrounding folk education and preservation. And so there's really no better person here to talk to us about the early songs and poems of the history of our region of here in Eastern Idaho. And so we're gonna have a little bit of a hybrid deal here. We're gonna talk some, we're gonna sing some. We're not gonna force anyone else to sing, but maybe Gary will sing a little for us. We're gonna play some tracks that he has compiled, and he's gonna tell us some of the fun um, and interesting stories behind them. But I am very interested in this, and I just wanted to start out by asking Gary a couple of questions. And by the way, if other questions come up, this is going to be a free flowing conversation as we like to have. And so feel free at any time to jump in, to unmute yourself, to ask a question. You're also welcome to put a question in the chat, and Ashley or I will see it, and we can relay it to Gary as well. So there's a lot of different ways that we can all communicate back and forth here, and hopefully learn something. So so Gary, I just want to ask the first question and have you talk a little bit about why it is that you do what you do. Why is it important to preserve these songs and poems?
Well, I grew up in West Virginia, and surrounded by ballads, story songs about everything, about things that actually happened and people who actually existed, ranging from sometimes they were disaster stories about train wrecks or hangings or shootings, but sometimes they were uplifting too. So I've always had a really special place in my heart for story songs about things that were real, and as I got older and more interested in history, you begin to realize that there's, other than nuclear weapons, I tell people, there's not really much that's new out in the news, because basically their impulses haven't changed in the 4,000 years of recorded history. So people are people. And if you understand where you came from, perhaps you have a chance of not making some of the mistakes that were made in the past. So I'm in the category that people that believe that you're doomed to repeat mistakes if you don't understand that mistakes were made. So there are several reasons why I love these songs, but there's an indescribable thing also for me about why these songs sing to me. I listen to pop music, and there's nothing there for me. It's kind of music that goes in one ear and out the other, and 2 minutes later, it's like it never existed. I don't remember anything. But these story songs, and I think a lot of people feel this way too. You remember, there was a song about, I have a song about a gal in Star Valley called Star Valley Rose. It's right there in your backyard, in the valley between Wyoming and eastern Idaho. She wound up being swept off her feet as a 14-year-old girl by a member of a robber gang that was hanging out there. And the people hear those stories, they kind of remember, and they especially remember the stories if it's mixed with music. So there's a magic of combining history with music that neither one alone captures. So historically based songs are where I'm most comfortable these days. I'm not saying they're true, absolutely literally true, but I will say that it's a view of history that's valid from the ground level, whereas an academic historian generally flies at 30,000 feet and looks down. I'm here to tell you the story from the person that's engaged in it down on the ground level is not the same story that a historian would tell.
And so these are ground level songs then, for the most part, right? That's
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. So tell us, Gary, how do you go about finding these songs and poems?
Well, when I retired in Idaho, 2005, of course, started looking for those story songs. I knew dozens, if not hundreds, of story songs from the Appalachians, and basically I could hardly find any. The great Rosalie Sorrells, notwithstanding, and her mighty efforts to find them, didn't find very many. And I knew that Idaho had been settled by many of the people with backgrounds like me, from the Appalachians, from the South, and from Missouri. And I knew those people did not stop creating music when they came here. Mm-hmm. So I believed that those songs had gotten lost. And indeed they had. So about all of the songs that I found, with a few rare and notable exceptions, come from archival sources. So I've been literally in every library and museum in Idaho. And there are a lot of hundreds of them searching for these songs. And in the last 15 years, a huge new tool has come to bear, and that's the internet. And so major libraries, major universities, Smithsonian, Library of Congress. I even found a song about Idaho in the Australian National Library. And the internet resources allow you to do those searches in a way you could not have done 20 years ago. And more stuff becomes available every day as more and more archival material gets digitized. So almost all of my songs come from old newspapers, dusty files in libraries, and once in a great while, a song comes to me from a living person. And usually they find that song in their great grandmother or great grandfather's papers.
That's pretty cool. And I'm sure there are no end of other songs out there remaining to be discovered, right? That are probably in our grandparents' papers and whatnot. So I guess that's a call to be on the lookout for that sort of thing, right?
That's right. If there's a song or a poem in a distant, one of your ancestors' papers in a cedar chest someplace in Pocatello, I can't find that unless somebody brings it to me. And I did find a song just like that. I had a call a few years ago from a gal in New Jersey, and she had been gone through her great grandfather's papers and discovered that he had been working on the railroad in 1895 in Pocatello. And there was a song there that he ran across and for some reason preserved. And she got in contact with me through the State Historical Society and said, "Are you interested in this song?" I said, "Yes, I've been looking for years for a railroad song about Pocatello." So that's the way that one developed. But that's pretty unusual for that to happen. But it's wonderful when it does happen.
I'm sure it is. Well, should we go ahead and play some songs?
Well, let's do. You have one you would like to start with? You have a list there.
Oh goodness, there's some good ones here. I'm not sure where to start. Let's see. How about The Boom Is Coming? I guess that's a poem rather than a song, right?
Let me tell you a little bit about that. This is pretty cool. As we were talking earlier, it's impossible to exaggerate the importance of the coming of the railroad. And the boom is coming. Where did I find that? I found that in the Blackfoot newspaper, the Idaho News, the issue of October 1st, 1887. And that's about the time that Blackfoot really became an important railroad stop, because it was a few years after the Oregon Short Line connected eastern Idaho to Oregon, 1883 and 84, when that happened. And a few years after, maybe 10 years after, the Utah Northern connected Salt Lake City to Montana. So the coming of the railroad transformed Blackfoot from a cow town and a horse raiding town to a railroad town. And so this poem is about somebody who saw what was going to happen to the development of Blackfoot almost overnight. So let's play the poem. It was recited by my dear friend Wayne Nelson from American Falls, rest in peace, who, in my opinion, was one of the great cowboy poet and singers of Idaho. So the Blackfoot boom is coming, 1887.
Night we're falling fast as through the city of Salt Lake passed a boy who waved in a jaunty trice a banner with a strange device. The boom is coming. His brow was raised, his eye beneath flashed like a falchion from its sheath, and like a silver clarion rung in accents of that unknown tongue. The boom is coming. In Ogden Holmes he saw the light of household fires gleam warm and bright. Above the bench the mountain shone, and from his lips escaped a groan. The boom is coming. Try not the road, the Loganite said, for dangers cluster o'er your head, and Bear River current is deep and wide. But still the clarion voice replied, the boom is coming. Oh, stay, the Oxford maid said, and rest thy weary head upon my breast. A tear stood in his soft blue eyes, but still he answered with a sigh, the boom is coming. Beware the Portneuf's rugged pass, beware the willows and tangled grass. It was McCammon's last good night. A voice was heard far out of sight, the boom is coming. At break of day as dawn appeared, and the shopmen at Pocatello's stirred, a voice fell like a falling star that awoke slumberers in home and car. The boom is coming. Where the sun arose on all around, on the streets of Blackfoot, the boy was found, waving it all in pleasing trice, the banner with a change device. The boom is coming.
Wayne Nelson. So the perfect voice for that recitation. I'm going to stick with, if you don't mind, stick with railroads just for a little bit here. One of the songs that I found is called the Driggs Railroad Song. And it was written in 1912 by B.W. Driggs and David E. Smith. And it celebrates the arrival of the Oregon Short Line spur to Driggs in 1912. You know, all of a sudden, it was now possible to get out of Driggs any time of the year, depth of the winter, in the mud season, whenever, and get to Idaho Falls in hardly any time. And before that, it could take days, you know, in blizzard season or mud season. Not only that, supplies and goods could get in and products could be shipped back out of Driggs. So it's really important to that little town when the railroad came, before auto cars and good roads were available. So this is a song that from the history of the Teton Valley, written by D.W. Driggs in 1926. And I believe my good friend Hal Cannon, who's a wonderful American folklorist, who was the arts director for traditional arts for the Utah Commission of the Arts for 20 or 30 years, sang this song. So do you mind queuing that one up so we can hear the Driggs Railroad Song?
There is not in this world a valley so sweet as the Vale of the Tetons in beauty complete. Now we are united by strong bands of steel. We'll all pull together in one common wheel. Hurrah for the railroad that's entered our vale, for the long dusty road has a wearisome tale. Hurrah for the valley and the peak's rugged crest, the Vale of the Tetons we all love the best. Not only our landscape or grandeur of scene, or the pure crystal water and the verdure so green, but the people and friendship of those living here that makes every scene in the valley so dear. Hurrah for the railroad that's entered our vale, for the long dusty road has a wearisome tale. Hurrah for the valley and the peak's rugged crest, the Vale of the Teton we all love the best. Hurrah for the railroad that's entered our vale, for the long dusty road has a wearisome tale. Hurrah for the valley and the peak's rugged crest, the Tetons we all love the best.
Beautiful, heartfelt sentiment celebrating the railroad.
No, that's really wonderful. I think part of me would have assumed that songs about the railroad coming would have been lamenting the loss of something, you know, the loss of this pure unbroken land or whatever. It's cool to hear the optimism.
Well, just think about what the railroad meant to the pioneers, coming from Missouri to, say, Utah. You know, it was a 6-month death march before. Suddenly, you could do it in 2 or 3 days. It meant you could have items like pianos. You could have ice in the middle of the summer. You could have seafood from the coast. So truly transformational. It also, without the railroad, there would not have been a great agriculture industry or ranching industry in Idaho. There was no market here. So, you know, it spelled the end of great long cattle drives and the blossoming of agriculture and ranching and timbering in Idaho. And mining too. You know, it impacted everything.
Sure thing. Well, it certainly makes sense that's an event that would be immortalized, right, in art, in song.
Yes. Can we stay in Driggs for another moment? I mean, that's an interesting place to me, but I found a song that's a parody of the Idaho state song. I mean, every state song is immediately parodied. My home state of West Virginia has a beautiful state song, and I know of at least 4 different parodies on it, and it usually involves moonshine and stuff like that. But this one is called Teton Peaks, and one verse is about some guy arriving well armed with nothing to shoot, and then a local wrestler that thought he was hot stuff, and he went over to Jackson and got his clock cleaned by a real wrestler over there. And then the last verse, President Driggs, that name keeps coming up, right? President Driggs called me, and when he found me in sin, and gave him a real talking to. So you will straighten out if you stay around here, buddy. So this is kind of the things I really like. I have no doubt that all 3 of those events happened over there. So somebody knew the local characters and made fun of them in songs. So let's listen to Teton Peaks parody of Here We Have Idaho. Here we have.
Sounds good.
So this is sung, by the way, by my good friend Marv Quinton, who was an elementary school principal in Idaho Falls for decades. Marv Quinton.
He was actually my elementary school principal.
No way.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. He lived just down the street from me. So there you go. All right. Here's Teton Peaks.
I came to this land with a gun in my hand to live where there's nothing to fear. In old Teton Basin I chose to remain and make a beginning from here. To the east are the Teton Peaks, stealing my heart from me, catching the sun on their snowy peaks and turning the blue to gray. Tetons, Alps of the West, you are the best. I take my rest in your presence. Mountains so high, Rocky Mountains and Teton Peaks. I wrestled Mike Yoko one day on the mat. He put a full Nelson on me. And he said, you are strong, but you can't get along with an old Teton wrestler like me. To the east are the Teton Peaks, stealing my heart from me. Catching the sun on the snowy peaks and turning the blue to gray. Tetons, Alps of the West, you are the best. I take my rest in your presence. Mountains so high, Rocky Mountains and Teton Peaks. Preston Driggs called me in when he found me in sin. Said this thing should not ever be. You will straighten out if you stay here about. And this is the end of your spree. To the east are the Teton Peaks, stealing my heart from me. Catching the sun on the snowy peaks and turning the blue to gray. Tetons, Alps of the West, you are the best. I take my rest in your presence. Mountains so high, Rocky Mountains and Teton Peaks. Rocky Mountains and Teton Peaks.
Good, clean fun.
That's right. So that brings up a question that I had, Gary. So obviously, since that was a parody on the state song, we know the melody. Now, I wonder, on some of the songs that you find, how do you go about, if something is just written down, are you finding usually sheet music or just words, and then you sort of have to come up with the melody from there? How does that work?
Rarely there's sheet music, but there's one special category where that's not true. I've found about 50 pieces of popular sheet music that have something to do with Idaho. They're usually Tin Pan Alley songs, and they're ridiculous portrayals of what real life was in Idaho. But the fact that I found so many of those tells us that there was a real fascination with this mysterious place called Idaho 100 years ago. And there still is today, by the way. If you live out of the state, there's a mystique about it. And so I found a bunch of songs that were obviously for stage plays in New York City and Broadway, but they have almost nothing to do with real life in Idaho. So that's kind of a special category where I can find sheet music. Otherwise, it's unusual to find sheet music. So sometimes, you have to remember the people writing these songs, they weren't professional musicians. So they would typically take a familiar air of the day. And often these songs trace back to the British Isles. The same melodies I heard back in West Virginia. It's a great folk tradition. The melody comes along and then the song gets morphed to adapt to local conditions. You got to love the Irish. The Irish are the best at that. When they move into an area, the first thing they start doing is complaining about, how tough life is. Voila, you've got a wonderful folk song, and they just use the melody that came with it. So sometimes it'll say, there'll be a note that says, to the air of Rosin the Bow. Well, I know thousands of melodies, so I know what that melody is. Teton Peaks, obviously, everybody knows the melody of, in Idaho, everybody should know the melody to the state song. Sometimes I can look at the lyrics and I can make a really good guess from the meter of the song and the lyrics, where that song, what the right melody would be. But then sometimes it's, you don't know. And then what I try to do is just come up with a melody that's appropriate for the period of time. And often a common melody will work. And I'll diverge a little bit here. I mean, I'll usually try to get somebody that really knows the subject matter to record the song. I prefer not to record it myself. Somebody that I remember one time, I found this goes back to Driggs again. I found this wonderful working man's complaint song called the Driggs Ditch Digger song. And this guy was ranting about the boss who just kind of sits on his fat duff and orders these guys out there slinging dirt, digging the ditches. So I happen to know a guy named Bruce Stanger who lives in Bone. You know where Bone is? You know, that's out there. He's a rancher. Bruce Stanger is also a well-known folk musician. So I said, well, man, this guy will know. He's the right guy for this song. So I called him up and say, Bruce, I got this song about digging ditch and irrigation ditches, and you interested in it? He said, yeah, I'm interested, but I can't talk to you right now. I'm setting pipe. So, perfect.
How appropriate.
A recording that was absolutely great, because he knew what that song was all about. So that's what I prefer to do. And that's probably a good lead into a song called Pal Pinto in Idaho, which has a little story behind it. I found a set of lyrics at the Special Collections Library at the University of Idaho. No melody, but I love the lyrics because they're so beautiful. It was, to me, it's one of the greatest Idaho true cowboy songs. So, and I found the lyrics several other places, which tells me that it was popular at one time. And so I had a guy named, I gave it to Vince Cross, who lives in Firth. Vince is a wonderful musician. I said, Vince, and he has a cowgirl singing partner named Mindy, who actually ranches out in the Bone area where this song was placed. And said, well, see if you can do something with it. And they came back a couple of months later with a beautiful rendition of it. So I published that in a project. And then I found a set of a simple melody line for it somewhere. And it was written by a guy named Bob Spritzer from the Bone area, and also Blackfoot. So now I had a melody, but I had a song recorded with the wrong melody, but that's okay. So I was in Pocatello one time doing a program, and I always at the end give people a chance to teach me a song. And this 80 plus year old gentleman named George Castellanos came up and said, well, I've got a song you might be interested in, and I'm not a very good singer and all that. And yeah, well, how did you learn it? So, well, I learned it on a cattle drive when I was just a little kid. And so I'll sing it for you. So we recorded it, and he had this beautiful, clear voice. And I'd like you to play George Castellanos singing a few verses of that song at a Pocatello event, live recording, unrehearsed, 80 some years old.
All right, let's do it.
Oh, give me back my pinto pony and the range of Idaho, where the quaking aspen cedar and the service berries grow. Let me roam those Blackfoot mountains and the shores of Old Gray's Lake, Wolverine or Tin Cup Valley, and where Bear Creek meets the Snake. How I miss you, little pony, and I wish I were tonight out with you 'neath the silence, away from these electric lights, with my saddle as a pillow and the grassy slope for you. To the northward lie the Tetons, and to the east old Caribou. Odelay, odelay, odelay.
So this is a wonderful folk song that was sung on cattle drives back there. So now let's go. A couple years later, I got a call from this gentleman from Salt Lake City. He was the BYU orchestra director, identified himself as the grandson of George Castellanos. Said George had passed away and they'd like to use that recording at his service. So, whoa, that's why I do these things, right? And I think is typically the families have no idea who their great grandparents really were. And sometimes they're shocked to learn, that they had musical talent. So now let's move it a few years later. And I got a call from California. And this gal says, my mom was in her sisters, the Robinson sisters, were made music there in the 50s all around, and they sang that and recorded that song. So you're kidding? So no, yeah, they really did. In fact, one of them is still living there in Pocatello. So I'm looking forward to meeting her someday. So I listened to the recording that they sent me, and it's a wonderful classic sound of a really good country music, a Western country music band in the 1950s. And it's one of the earliest recordings I know of that was made in Idaho. So if you can play the Robinson sisters now and see where they took this folk song and turned it into a fine commercial recording.
Give me back my pinto pony and the range of Idaho, where the quaking asps and cedars and the sarvice berries grow. Little pal, my heart is with you, where the sky above is blue, where the sun is always shining, and where hearts are always true. Let me trade these town crease breeches for my boots and spurs and chaps, and a roundup on the ranges where the cowgirls wear felt hats. Give me Meadow Creek and Pinto, far from turmoil, strife, and care. For a cowboy friend is truer, and there are no strangers Give me back my pinto pony and the range of Idaho. Give me back the sagebrush prairies where the sago lilies grow. Let me ride my pinto pony underneath a star-filled sky, out there where the moon is mellow, where the lonely cows cry. Many years we spent together on the Circle Lazy A. Night winds whistled in the pine trees, and the lone wolf called his mate. Purple distance, hazy mountain, rosy sunset, twilight glow. Cattle lowing, horns are clanging, and they call it Idaho.
The Robinson sisters. What I love about these songs, they give you a snapshot of the culture of the times. This is right after, not too long after World War II ended, and dance halls were flourishing. And so made this recording with a great dance beat to it. You know, you can just picture people at the time, you know, out on the dance floor when I hear a song like that. But they took it from this folk song, you know, from somewhere around 1920. So I love it.
That's pretty cool. And do we, it looks like, do we have a Robinson here in the crowd as well? Wonderful. No, you're on mute, ma'am. Well, she seems happy.
Oh, great.
We'll have to connect up a little later then. Good. That's wonderful.
So
Well,
finding songs that give you a insight into the culture of the times, that's really what I'm after. Those are my five-star songs. So that's a 5-star song for me.
well, that's really cool to see the different iterations of it also, and see how it was carried through and changed for different audiences, but it's the same deal, huh? That's great.
Yeah.
Well, good. Let's see. So you sent out another one earlier to me that I was interested in hearing, and it's called Ed Trafton's song, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is a great story. Ed Trafton lived, well, one version of the story was that he would steal horses on the Teton, on the Jackson side, and drive them across the Tetons and sell them in Idaho. Then he could steal horses in Idaho, drive them over to Wyoming and sell them, you know. So this guy just couldn't stay out of trouble. And this song actually was about the time he was arrested for cattle theft. And the prosecutor was the guy, the famous sagebrush lawyer, James Hawley, who wound up being governor of Idaho later on, which is quite another story. But at any rate, this guy, Ed Trafton, AKA Ed Harrington, was always in trouble. So he wound up spending time in the slammer at the old Boise pen. And of course, he got a raw deal. Of course he did. So in the song, you know, his compadres got almost no penalty, and he got, you know, 10 years in the pen or whatever. So that's what this song was about. And apparently, after he got out of jail, he would sing it around the Teton Valley at dances and so on. But the story doesn't really end there, because in some years later, and I think it was 2014 or 1914, he single-handedly held up 14 stagecoaches in Yellowstone National Park, which of course made it a federal crime because it's federal property, and got away. And he wound up down in Denver, and he would have gotten away with it if he hadn't cheated on his wife. And his wife turned him in. And oh, by the way, he defrauded his mother of $10,000. So he spent time in a Colorado jail too. So he eventually went to Leavenworth for the Yellowstone caper. So you just can't make up stuff like this. You know, it's just too amazing. And he eventually went back to the Teton Valley and then made a stab at becoming a cowboy extra in Hollywood. You got to admire the audacity. So at any rate, this is the song about Ed Trafton getting framed and railroaded, in his opinion. And in fact, he was probably guilty of sin. So you have that queued up?
All right.
Ed Trafton. Sawing his way out of jail, which he did.
County, pause and listen to my song. It is of one Ed Harrington. I'll not detain you long. He was placed on trial with Nickerson, the same 12 jurymen that set him free, convicted me, and sent me to the pen. 'Twas on the 24th of May, the boys did undertake to try a spell the sweets of home and give the jail a shake. 'Twas a clever plot they carried through, for Lum would never fail. They placed the guard behind the bars, the prisoners ran the jail.
Our liberty was short but sweet, as everybody knows. But in those coming morning hours, poor Edwin lost his toes. They brought us back to jail and irons, they brought us back to stay, till old Judge Hayes' session held, oh curse the fatal day. When we were brought before the bar to hear what had been done, clerk cried out, "Not guilty, sir, Columbus, Nickerson." Verdict though for Harrington, he cried in thunderous tone, "He's guilty and of robbery for Harrington alone." When sentence was pronounced on me, my God, I'll never forget the pain that shot all through my heart. I feel the anguish yet. The judge said, "Sir, I understand you mingled with bad men. 25 years I'll give to you in Boise City Pen." Now God help judge and jurymen that had my case in mind. What charity can they expect when at his bar they stand? May the sentences of Judgment Day for judge and jurymen, may it be as hard as what I had to serve in Boise Pen. And now my story you have heard, I ain't got much to say, but when we get an honest judge, will be a happy day. When men are tried and fairly tried by honest jurymen, the innocent will never know the woes of Boise Pen.
So we were trying to make it sound like the other prisoners were joining in with tin cups or whatever on the rhythm there. So
That was a lot of fun, and that was you, I believe, recording that song, wasn't it, Gary?
that was me singing, yes, and playing banjo.
And what were some of the other instruments and sound effects that we were hearing there?
Oh, I think that sawing sound was one of my friends just taking a pick and running it across a guitar string, a wound guitar string. So, and I just picked up junk that was lying around, a bar of steel, and a couple of pieces of steel to clank together. It's just junk,
Sounded great. That's fun. That's really cool. Well, very good. Well, I think we've got time for a couple more, and before you go, we're gonna make you sing something for us live here too. But I would love to open it up and see if we have questions from the crowd as well before we get too much farther. So maybe while we're waiting to see if other questions come along, I'd be interested to hear about what have you. I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. How do Idaho songs differ from songs from other places that you've heard?
Well, the details, of course, are different. There's only one Teton Valley. There's only one Driggs. There's only one Bone, Idaho. There's only one Blackfoot. But really, the great folk tradition, American folk tradition, is pretty much universal, and it's the same salt of the earth people that are making up these songs, and they're people, and some people like Ed are a little more colorful and rambunctious than others. Then we have President Driggs that wrote a beautiful tribute to the railroad. So it kind of covers the span of humanity, down at the working level. And that's true. That's true everywhere. I think people are basically the same everywhere. And there's a rural and urban separation. So I tend to be more interested in the urban songs, and the cities. Urban songs get a little bit high tone and off the mark for what I'm looking for. So people, sometimes I ask my classical music friends, well, what's new out there in classical music? or did classical music basically stall out, with Beethoven? And there is new stuff out there, but it's probably not stuff that's going to be remembered like Mozart or Aaron Copland or things or so forth. Just like I think very little of current popular music or country music is going to be remembered next year, much less 100 years from now. As I mentioned, I'm after these songs that say something about the culture of Idaho, because I think those vignettes are worth studying and understanding. I tell people that of all the music that's out there today, it seems as though every generation has a music form that's remembered. There was the Elvis generation, there's the Beatles. For me, the Southern rock thing in the 70s. Every generation has, there's the big band era before, the jazz era before that. So what right now in the 2010 to 20 period, what will people remember 100 years from now and think is really interesting? And they're often shocked when I say I think it's rap, because rap is distinctive, and you may not like the beat and you may not like the stories, but it's basically storytelling down at the ground level. And I think musicologists will find that perhaps the most interesting music on the scene, looking back from 100 years in the future. I don't think they're going to find most popular music and most country music of today very interesting at all. But rap, it's a harsh message, but these are people talking about what they actually deal with day to day.
Yeah, I expect you're right about that. I was wondering if you were going to say that. When you said, well, what genre is going to be remembered, that's what came to my mind immediately too. So, and it's interesting to hear you talk, Gary, about how we're all essentially the same, right? And how songs here are similar to songs that you may have heard in West Virginia or elsewhere, just with with place names and a few details changed out a little bit. So I think you're right on, and you sort of hit on something there that we like to talk about a lot here at the museum, that we really have an incredibly rich and detailed and interesting history here in Idaho, and in Eastern Idaho even specifically. But I think there's a lot of people who grew up here, who have lived here for decades, who sometimes think, oh well, nothing interesting ever happens here. Oh, it's Idaho. We don't have that sort of that culture like they have in the South, or in name another place. But in fact, I think we at the museum like to think here that, well, in fact, we do have a lot of that, of course, and it's just, these stories have to be collected, these stories have to be told, and they have to be made available for people to understand what's special about the place that they live. And as I look at this song list also that you had prepared for us, there is a song about sagebrush. And it occurs to me, and that's something that we've talked about in the new Idaho exhibit that we've built here, that, we Idahoans, I think, look at the sagebrush and we think, oh, well, what's interesting about that? It's everywhere, it's harsh, it's, it's a vile weed. But in fact, it's something that's endemic to this area, and it's interesting, and it has its own world, right? And it's in its own place here, that sometimes we can be a little bit too close to the lens, I think. And so I just want to thank you, first of all, for doing this work and helping to collect the stories for our region and our area, so we can learn more and we can become more in tune with our own history. I think that's so important.
Yeah, I think familiarity breeds contempt sometimes, and sometimes it takes somebody with a different perspective to see. I mean, I deal with lots of libraries and museum boards around the state, small ones around the state. And it's my belief that the ones that are really prospering are the ones that have a beautiful mix of people who are well rooted there, been there for a long time, and some new people who have seen the elephant, if you know that term. They have been out in the outside world, and they have a perspective that is hard to have if you've lived your whole life in the area. On the other hand, the people who live their whole lives there have a perspective that it will take a lifetime to achieve. So to me, boards of libraries and musicians that have that beautiful mix are the ones that do the best work.
Amen to that. So I'm interested then, I mentioned that we have a sagebrush related song here, When the Sagebrush All Is Cleared. Are we,
That's a
tell us a
poem.
little bit about that one?
Yeah, I have this on my list here. This came from the Arco Advertiser newspaper, March 12th, 1909. And this is when irrigation came. It's the period of time when irrigation came, and even to Arco. So it's funny to me. Arco, that newspaper, was a big deal at one point in time because it was the gateway to the mines. And my friend Wayne Nelson recited it, and it's just really great because it people move out here, and there's a freedom when you're homesteading that you don't have when you're in a congested farmlands and all that, and perhaps they bring a new perspective to the whole thing, when they come to a new area. I think that's what this poem, When Sagebrush is All Cleared and Water's in the Ditch.
When the sagebrush all is cleared and water's in the ditch, and you send it trickling o'er the land, all nature to bewitch. When the trees begin to sprout and the meadows all look green, and a little garden patch on every ranch is seen. Oh, it's then's the time a feller is feeling that he's rich, when the sagebrush is all cleared and the water's in the ditch. It seems so kind of different, like out here in Idaho. When you get your crop all planted, you're sure it's gonna grow. 'Twill never be too wet, and you're sure it won't be too dry. You know things are working right up yonder in the sky. You love all things around you, the best you can't tell which, when the sagebrush all is cleared and the water's in the ditch. You thought she was all right, loved her fields of yellow corn, but should you be among them, dodging hoof and horn, to go out and feed the stock through the piercing sleet and snow, and build fires in the morning, which is 20 degrees below? Now you're writing to all your friends to come out here and get rich, when the sagebrush all is cleared and the water's in the ditch. You're telling them all about Idaho with her beautiful flowers and trees, that her merchants all are busy, that they make you think of bees. Now just keep right on boosting for our dear old Idaho, for it's the only place on earth that everything will grow. Just tell them that our apples grow like pumpkins and sich, and the sagebrush all is cleared and the water's in the ditch.
I love that poem. And I'm going to make one comment here about progress in communications. It's a great enabler and it's a great destroyer. So somewhere around 1910, up until 1910, it was very common to find poetry and songs written by local people appearing in newspapers. And then, for the most part, that tradition went away. And I think syndication and being able to get news around much faster. The railroad was part of it. Telegraph was part of it. Before that, on these long winter nights in Idaho, people would write. They would write poetry, they would write songs. There were no distractions with computers, TVs, radio. And I'm convinced that in many ways, people, even with third grade educations back then, were more literate than a typical high school graduate is today in this sense. I mean, this is a beautifully put together poem from Arco, probably written by somebody who had very limited formal education. So I think somewhere out in your audience, there are some papers that have come down from a great grandmother who, you know, when the babies finally went to sleep at night and it was still only 7 o'clock and it's dark, and roll out a kerosene lantern and write. And once in a while, they would put them, send them to the local paper, and the new editor would publish them. But after somewhere around 1910, it seems like even little podunk towns, papers started to pretend they were the Boston Globe or the Washington Post, and you know, the newspapers to me became vastly less interesting at that point.
That's an interesting part of our history. So we have a question that came in on the chat from one of our guests here today, is wondering about songs from Northern Idaho, and I'm sure you have plenty.
Well, that's a really timely question, because North Idaho is the last region of the state that I have not covered adequately. And so I think interpretive booklet and CD number 20 is, and probably the last one that I do, is going to be in North Idaho. I plan to spend most of the month in September next year up there, and I'll be working closely with the Bonners Ferry Museum and a wonderful small museum in Potlatch. I've got a lot of material already collected, but what I like to do is spend time there and get a real sense of place. I did that 2 years ago when I did the Salmon River project and working with the Salmon Museum, and they found me a fantastic, primitive cabin. You know, it's only 10 miles out of town, but it took most of an hour to drive there. It was perfect. And so I do day trips out of there and really get a sense for what that country was like. So I'll be doing that next September, and writing and recording these projects is a winter project for me. So I'll be doing that next winter. Boy, that is a rich area up there, and it is light years different from Southeast Idaho. Absolutely, both areas are absolutely wonderful, but in different ways. So now we'll be up there in rainforests, in big timber, big cedars, grizzly bears, all that great stuff. So good question. So stay tuned.
Perfect. And I suppose I should mention too, just put in a plug for you, or allow you to put in a plug too, that we are working with Gary to get some of his recordings available here in our museum store. But if you are interested, if people are interested, how else could they go about hearing some more of your recordings and learning more of these works?
Well, you can message me on Facebook, and I don't mind giving out my email addy, pgaryeller@aol.com, PGARYELLER. And as I say, a couple of these projects are sold out of the 19 I've done, but I do have copies of most of them. And the single CD projects are $15 plus a couple bucks for postage. The double CD projects and bigger booklets are 20 plus a few bucks for postage. And if any of the viewers out there has an early Idaho song that I may have missed, let me know. You can go to an unfortunately outdated website, www.bonafideaho.com, BONAFIDAHO.com, and you can find a list of probably almost 150 songs that I've collected over the years with a little bit of background information on them. And there's probably 50 recordings there of some of those songs that you can listen to. They're usually not very polished. They're just kind of home recordings, but you get a sense of what the songs are all about. So you can message me or email me.
Perfect. And we will make sure to provide for everybody here. And when we send out the recording of this session, we will include those links as well for anyone who would like to contribute or to hear more. So I want to be cognizant of our time here, but I really feel like it would be a mistake not to ask you to get out your guitar or your banjo, Gary, and sing something for us today. Are you willing to do that for us? Sure.
Let me play. We mentioned at the beginning Star Valley Rose, and this is in 1896. The Montpelier Bank was robbed by the Butch Cassidy gang. So this song is connected to that because one of his gang members was a guy named Matt Warner, and outlaws would hang out in the Star Valley area, but first of all, it was quite remote. But perhaps more importantly, it was close to 3 different states, so they would play the jurisdictional thing to their advantage. So this song was collected by Julie Glenn, sung by Julie Glenn at Rexburg, and collected by Rosalie Sorrells, and that's where I got the song. And Matt Warner came in under an alias and said, you know, I'm a rancher, I just sold out. And he's throwing money around, obviously had lots of money, and nobody asked too many questions. And he fell in love with this 14-year-old girl and wound up marrying her without telling her exactly who he was. And like all good songs, ballads from that era, there's a moral at the end in the last verse. Way out in old Star Valley, 'twas many years ago, dwelt lovely Rose Morgan, the sweetest girl I know. One day she met a stranger, a reckless wandering man, who said, I am a rancher, disprove it if you can. He courted her all winter, and he bought a wedding ring. He said, we will be leaving right early in the spring. And when the snow had melted and flowers bloomed again, he took her up to Jackson to fool the sheriff's men. One day he said, Rose, darling, you are a robber's wife. My dear, I am a bandit. I'm hunted for my life. 8 years she lived with William. Each day was filled with fear that the sheriff might come riding and take away her dear. One day the search was ended. Oh, it will never fail. They came and took her darling and locked him up in jail. Now Rose is sad and lonely, and with her living breath, she prays the Lord in heaven to call her home in death. Way out in old Star Valley, 'twas many years ago, dwelt lovely Rose Morgan, the sweetest girl I know. Now maidens, please remember, be careful as you can. Don't ever wed a stranger. A reckless, wandering man. So what happened to Matt Warner after all of that? Well, Rose died at a fairly young age, and Matt became a sheriff for several decades in Utah, which was not unusual. You know, who better to understand criminals than a criminal?
Fantastic. That is wonderful. Thank you, Gary. Thank you for indulging us that way. That sounds fantastic. Well, if there are any final questions, go ahead and speak up, or put it in the chat. But if not, I would like to ask everybody, if you could, as is our way, to unmute yourself briefly. Let's see. And we are going to offer Gary Eller a round of applause.
Well done. Very well done.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, Gary. This was a real pleasure, and really look forward to having you here in person as well.
Well, I look forward to coming to your area.
Good. Well, we're going to make sure to do that, and so that's for everyone out there. You've got you've had a taste now of what will hopefully be a future live presentation that we can do here at the museum, and we look forward to working with you as well to try to uncover and document more of these wonderful songs and poems.
Well, people know how to reach me if they happen to have an early Idaho song or poem.
Good. Well, we will get right on that then. Thanks again, Gary. We will talk to you again soon, and thank you all for coming today. It's been a pleasure. We'll talk to you again next time.
Okay, bye.